Hello, this is Tony Burke with a short screencast for module ACSS402, Advanced Entry Introduction to Construction Studies, and this screencast is going to cover the topic of working in teams. Let's start by considering exactly what a team is, because we need to recognise that a team is actually different from a group. A group of people could simply share an office together or go to lunch together, but what distinguishes a team is that the members of the team have some shared goals and that they work together to achieve those goals. So why do we work in teams? What are the advantages of doing so? The first point is the idea of synergy. Synergy refers to the concept whereby the output of a team is actually greater than the sum of the combined inputs of the team members. Team working can actually be very productive. Secondly, team situations generate a lot of creativity as the imagination and ideas of the team members work off each other. We're not relying just on the input of one person. Thirdly, human beings are naturally social. They actually enjoy interacting with other people, so an effective team situation can be a really enjoyable environment to work in. Fourthly, when we're dealing with unfamiliar problems, it can be much more reassuring to do so in a team situation. If you're having to cope with unfamiliar problems on your own, you can become anxious or intimidated, but that doesn't really happen so much in team situations. A common reason for using teams is when you need a variety of skills to tackle a particular problem or project. And this, of course, is very relevant to the construction industry, where a wide variety of skills would be required on any given project, whether they're design skills or management skills. You really need a team to bring those different skills together. And lastly is the idea that we generally are much more supportive of things which we have helped to create. We are committed to things when we have been involved in the creation of those things. So if we've been involved in a team which has worked towards a project, then we tend to be much more committed to seeing that through as a member of the team than we would perhaps if we were working on our own. Okay, let's look now at the typical qualities which team players exhibit. Now, these are mass generalizations, really. Well, I'm not trying to suggest for a moment that we fall into either one camp or another, but generally speaking, people who are seen as good team players tend to be people who are willing to share their ideas, willing to share their resources, and to communicate with other people in an open way. As I say, these are very much generalizations, but a third point is that good team players are often seen as likable people. Now, that's a very subjective thing to say, but if you actually ask people what it is about someone who is recognized as a good team player that makes them a good team player, one of the traits that regularly comes up is that the person is quite likable, and that will clearly vary from one person to another. Against that, there are also traits which are identified amongst poor team players, and generally speaking, these people tend to be quite individualistic. They focus on their own objectives, their own ambitions, their own aspirations, and they're not prepared to put aside those individual ambitions at the expense of the objectives of the team. They also tend to be very competitive people. Again, they want to win, they want to be the best, and they might view working in a team as placing themselves in a situation where they might be held back by other people. Generally speaking, poor team players can be quite decisive people as well. They are faced with a problem, they make a decision as to how they're going to tackle that problem, and again, they're not really prepared to look at other perspectives and to compromise their own views on things. They've made their decision and they want to see it through. Now, of course, for most of us, we are not naturally good team players or poor team players. Most of us fall somewhere between the two. And an interesting way of determining what exactly we bring to any team situation is to use a technique which was developed by a guy called Meredith Belbin at the Henley Management College. And what he sought to do was to look at people's personality traits, their intellectual styles and their behaviours, and try to categorize them. And he effectively brought together clusters of different behaviors and gave these various categories names such as, for example, a coordinator or a shaper or a monitor evaluator or a resource investigator. There's 8 or 9 different categories, and nowadays lots of organizations will actually use this technique to basically undertake psychological profiling of people who have applied for jobs with them, and it's a way of determining whether an applicant for a job will fit into an existing team. Now on Blackboard I've actually uploaded the Belbin questionnaire, where you can download it, have a look at it. It basically involves looking at a series of statements and the responses to those statements and allocating marks to a range of different options, and in so doing you can work out a score, and there's a separate score sheet which you can also download, and eventually it will point to particular tendencies in team situations, and it's actually quite revealing to go through that exercise, and I would encourage you to do it and perhaps use it in your e-portfolio, and certainly consider it in the context of team situations. Okay, let's have a look at what perhaps constitutes the perfect team, because I dare say there isn't really many examples of the perfect team, but what sort of things would we find in the perfect team? Well, firstly, we don't want lots of people who are all exactly the same. We really need a range of complementary roles, people who bring different skill sets to the team situation. We also need the team members to be willing to communicate with one another. There needs to be an effective framework for communication to take part between the team members. The team members also have to be committed to the goals of the team, and they basically need to set aside their own individual goals and concentrate on the goals of the team. The team members also need to be committed to each other's success, so they need to genuinely want all the other people in the team to succeed as well as themselves. The team mustn't be too rigid in its outlook. If things aren't going according to plan, they need to be willing to review how they're tackling problems and change them if necessary. Ideally, in the perfect team as well, there should be a high level of creativity which comes from the team members' imagination, bouncing ideas off one another, and so on. And lastly, there needs to be an ability to deal with difficulties, coping with the problems which inevitably arise in any team situation. Let's have a look then at how a typical team evolves from the point at which it's formed right through to the point at which it hopefully is operating effectively. There are 4 stages which are recognized as providing a typical evolution of a team. Let's have a look at each of them. They're known as forming, storming, norming, and performing. At the forming stage, the team is highly undeveloped. The team members don't really know each other very well. They're perhaps a little bit wary of each other, and there's a degree of anxiety amongst the team members. Perhaps people feel shy, they don't want to communicate, they don't want to commit themselves. They tend to focus instead on the task at hand rather than thinking about the other people in the team. As such, there is quite often a high level of politeness. People don't want to offend anyone else in the team, and similarly don't want to be offended. So the team goes through what's sometimes referred to as a honeymoon period, where everyone's getting along reasonably well and everything is polite and happy and so on. But fairly quickly the team may move on to what's referred to as the storming stage, and this is a much more dynamic stage when people in the team are concerned with how they actually work with one another. There tends to be a high level of sometimes a high level of polarization, people taking sides, people perhaps forming cliques within the group, turning on one another, expressing their opinions, and there's often a very lively debate at this stage in the group's progress. In effect, there's a lot of experimentation taking place. People are pushing one another, finding out how far they can go with another person in the group, for example. If they can get through that stage, then they reach the norming stage, and at this stage the group becomes much more cohesive. Hopefully the conflicts, or if the conflicts had existed, those conflicts will be overcome, and there's a much higher level of cooperation amongst the team members, and as such the team starts to be much more effective in its outputs. So then hopefully the team can go on to the performing stage, where it effectively becomes a mature team. People are much more relaxed with one another, and the goals of the team actually start to be achieved. And I dare say if you've been a member of an effective team, you may well recognise those stages that many teams go through on the road to becoming effective. Okay, lastly then, let's just finish up with looking at some common problems that arise amongst teams. There's a whole list of problems, but I'm just going to identify a few common ones. Firstly, one of the common problems is team members who simply find it very difficult to work in team situations. It's a very difficult problem to deal with, because if someone is unwilling to contribute to a team and to participate in a team, then it makes it difficult for the team to be effective. But equally, you may get members who are quite happy in a team because it enables them to hide behind team responsibility, rather than actually have to take responsibility as an individual. They are quite happy to just sit back and let the team as a whole take responsibility, and therefore not have to be identified as being individually responsible. A third problem is the difficulties that arise when teams become too tightly knit. They close themselves inward. They don't consider outside influences. They sort of generate an attitude of us against the outside world. That can be a very awkward team, because they're not prepared to face up to the context within which the task of the team is actually being operated. Another problem is the problem of spending too much time on communication. Communicating with one another is great, but there comes a point where you actually have to get on with the task at hand, so we can't spend too much time on communication. Still on problems with teams, another three to mention. Clearly, occasionally conflict does arise between team members. We're not just talking about disagreement here, because disagreement is common, but when conflict arises, it's a much more difficult problem to overcome. Associated with that is a lack of openness amongst team members. It's really, really important that effective team members are open with one another. And lastly is the problem of team members who don't really feel comfortable with perhaps other members of the team or the team in general. And again, this is something which really needs to be addressed at an early stage if the team is going to be effective. So last thing I'm going to draw your attention to is an excellent publication that's produced by an organisation called Constructing Excellence. It's called Effective Teamwork, a Best Practice Guide for the Construction Industry, and I've uploaded that to Blackboard, so I suggest you download that and have a look through it, and I think it will be useful for you. Okay, thanks for listening.